They laughed at her before she even stepped down off that wagon. I know, because I was standing close enough to count the laughs. 4 men, and the smallest one came from a boy of 19 who didn't have the sense to be ashamed yet. She wasn't what any of us expected. Thomas had paid for a wife the way a drowning man pays for rope, and what climbed down into the dust at the bar C was a small woman in a gray traveling dress, spectacles fogged with heat, holding a carpetbag like it was the only solid thing left in the world. She didn't look like she could save anything. She looked like something that needed saving herself. I've worked cattle 31 years. I've seen droughts hollow out good men and watched banks take land prettier than any I'll ever own. I thought I knew how this story ended the minute I saw her. I was wrong about her. I was wrong about damn near all of it. This is the story of the autumn a stranger I never expected to remember walked into a dying ranch and refused to let it die, and what it cost her to do it. Stay with me. Some of it still doesn't sit easy in me, even now. The wagon came in low and slow off the Hollies Road, raising a brown smear of dust that hung in the air long after, because there wasn't a breath of wind that summer to carry anything away. I remember that most. The stillness. 3 months without rain will make a man notice the absence of ordinary things, the way the cottonwoods down by the seep had quit rustling, the way even the flies seemed too tired to bite. I was mending tack on the porch step, working a strip of latigo through my fingers, counting the stitches under my breath the way I do when my mind won't settle. 16, 17, 18. Old habit. My mother used to say I'd count the angels off heaven's gate if you gave me time enough. Thomas Caldwell stood out in the yard in his good shirt, the one his late wife had sewn the collar on, and he had it buttoned all the way up though the heat was murderous. He'd shaved. He'd had Lupe black his boots. I'd never seen a man dress so careful for something he was so plainly dreading. His daughter Sari stood beside him, 8 years old and all elbows, gripping a fistful of wilted brown wildflowers she'd picked along the wash. She'd picked them for the new lady. They were already dead in her hand, but nobody had the heart to tell her. When the wagon stopped, the men drifted over from the corral the way men do when there's nothing to laugh at all day and a chance of it arrives. Boone, our foreman, big and slow grinning. Tully and Marsh, the 2 drovers brothers, both useless past noon. And young Purnell, 19, who'd ride off a cliff if Boone told him it was the manly thing. She came down off the seat without taking the hand the driver offered. That was the first thing she did, and I marked it without knowing why it mattered. She got her own boot to the wheel hub, then to the ground, and stood there blinking through her spectacles at a yard full of strangers. Then she took them off, the spectacles, and wiped them on her sleeve and put them back, and that small ordinary motion is when Boone laughed. "This her," he said to nobody. "Thomas, you sure they sent the whole order?" Tully and Marsh snickered. Purnell laughed because they did. Thomas's jaw went tight. He didn't laugh, but he didn't stop them either, and I saw the woman hear all of it. She didn't flinch. That was the second thing I marked. She just looked at each of them in turn, slow, like she was reading a ledger and finding the sums didn't trouble her. "Mr. Caldwell," she said. Her voice was low and even, an Eastern voice, careful with its edges. "I'm Maren Holt." "Ma'am," Thomas took his hat off. His hands were shaking just slightly and he hid them by holding the hat. "Welcome. This is my girl, Sarah." Sari thrust the dead flowers up at her without a word. Her whole little face had gone red with the terror of it. Maren Holt knelt down in the dust in her gray traveling dress, right down on her knees so she was below the child's eye line, and took those crumbling flowers like they were cut roses. "These are mine," she said. "Nobody's ever picked me flowers before." That was a lie, maybe, or maybe it wasn't. I never did know. But Sari's whole body unclenched, and the men quit grinning because there's nothing for a fool to laugh at in a thing like that. The bar C was dying. I should say that plain so you understand the shape of what she'd walked into, because she didn't know it yet, and neither did the part of Thomas Caldwell that still hoped. 2 summers before, the fever had come through and taken his wife Alina in 9 days. It took 2 of our hands the same week, and it took something out of Thomas that never came back. He'd run the ranch since like a man walking in his sleep, going through the motions of a life he no longer believed in. He let the bookwork pile. He let Boone make decisions Boone wasn't fit to make. He borrowed against the place from Amos Royce at the Hollies Bank, and then he borrowed again to pay the first, which is the kind of arithmetic that ends only one way. And then the rain quit. By the time the wagon brought Maren Holt to us, the seep, our one reliable water, a spring that fed a green pocket of grass down in the south draw, had dropped to a trickle you could have dammed with your hat. The river was a bed of cracked plates. The herd was thinning, the calves dropping early and dying, and every man on the place knew that come the autumn note, Royce would call the loan, and Thomas wouldn't have the cattle wait to sell against it. What none of us knew yet, what she'd be the one to find, was that Royce wanted us to fail, that the failing was the whole point. But I'm getting ahead. That first night, all I knew was that a strange, small woman had come to keep a dead woman's house, and the men thought it was the funniest thing to happen at the Bar C in a year. She didn't make it easy for them to keep laughing, which only made them work harder at it. That first supper, Lupe set the table and Maren sat at Alina's old place at the foot, and you could see Thomas notice and not say anything and hate himself for both. The men ate the way men eat when they're performing loud, sprawled, testing. Boone told a long story about a mail-order bride down in Tucson who turned out to be 60 years old and missing her teeth, and he told it watching Maren the whole time to see her color. She didn't color, she buttered her bread. "You find that funny, Mr. Boone," she said when he'd finished. "I find a lot of things funny, ma'am." "That's good," she said. "A man who can't laugh at himself runs short of material out here. There's so little else." It took Boone a second. Then his ears went red, and Tully laughed at him for once, and the balance of the table tipped just slightly, just for a moment, and I bent over my plate so nobody'd see me smiling. After supper, when the men had gone to the bunkhouse and Sari was put to bed, I came back to the main house for the liniment I keep for my knee, and I found her in Thomas's office. She had a lamp lit low and the ledger open in front of her, the big debt ledger Thomas hadn't opened in months, and she was going down the columns with one finger, her lips moving, the way I count stitches. She had her spectacles up close to the page. She didn't hear me at first. "Mrs. Holt," I said. "Caldwell, I mean, beg pardon." She looked up, not startled. "Mr. Bracken." "Eli." "Eli." She set the finger on the page to hold her place. "Do you know what your employer pays Mr. Royce in interest?" "That ain't my business, ma'am." "It's about to be everyone's business." She said it flat, no drama in it. "These figures are wrong, not by accident." She tapped the column. "Someone's been adding charges that don't belong, someone with a steady hand and a poor conscience." I didn't know what to say to that. I'm a cowhand. Numbers in a column are just fences I can't see over. "Did you work figures back east?" I asked. "Before?" For a moment something crossed her face, not quite pain, more like the memory of a door that had closed. "I kept the books at a textile mill in Lowell for 9 years, she said. "After my husband died, they paid me 2/3 what they'd paid the man before me, and they reminded me of it often." She closed the ledger gentle, like it was sleeping. "I am not afraid of a column of numbers, Eli. I have been afraid of a great many things in my life. Numbers were never one of them." Then she blew out the lamp, and the dark came down soft between us, and she said good night, and I stood there in Thomas Caldwell's hallway with a strange feeling crawling up my spine that I couldn't name. I named it later. It was hope, and I'd been so long without it I hadn't known the shape of the thing. The setback came on the 4th day, and it came the way the worst ones do, quiet, while you're looking elsewhere. Maren had taken to riding out with me in the mornings to learn the lay of the place, which scandalized Boone, who held that a wife's geography ended at the kitchen door. She rode badly. I'll be honest about it. She sat the old mare Biscuit like a sack of seed and gripped the horn white-knuckled, and the men got a week's worth of comedy out of watching her. But she went out every morning anyway, jaw set, learning the wash and the draw and where the herd was holding. That fourth morning, we rode down to the seep so she could see the water, or what was left of it. And Royce was there. Not Royce himself. His man, a slick one named Deuce Garrett, and two riders, and they were sitting their horses right at the lip of the seep where our water pooled, and they had a surveyor's chain stretched across the green pocket of grass, measuring it. "Morning," Garrett said, touching his hat with two fingers lazy. "Mrs. Caldwell, is it? Congratulations on the nuptials." He smiled with his mouth only. "Just doing a little surveying. Bank's got an interest in this parcel, water rights and such, you understand." I felt Maren go still beside me on the mare. "This is Bar C land," I said, "clear to the ridge." "Sure it is," Garrett said, "for now." He coiled his chain slow, taking his time, letting us watch. "You tell Thomas the note's due 1st of October. Mr. Royce wanted me to mention he's not inclined to extend it this year." He looked at the trickle of water, at the dying grass, at the bones of a calf bleached white at the water's edge. "Don't look like you'll make the weight anyhow. Shame. Pretty piece of ground." They rode off the way they'd come, unhurried, and the dust of them hung in the dead air a long while. Maren didn't speak the whole ride back. When we reached the yard, she got down off Biscuit, careful, and stood holding the reins, looking at the house, the sagging porch, the broken third step, the dead flowers Sary's child hands had left to dry on the windowsill. "Eli," she said, "when did Mr. Caldwell last go through that ledger with the bank's copy beside it?" "I don't reckon he ever has." She nodded slow, like that confirmed something. And here's the thing I marked, the thing that made me understand she was made of stranger stuff than any of us had laughed at. She didn't look beaten. She looked the way a man looks when the storm finally breaks after a long dread, almost relieved. Like the waiting had been the worst of it, and now there was just the work. "All right," she said, mostly to herself, and went inside to start her real arithmetic. I should have felt better. I didn't, not yet. Because I'd seen the calf bones at the water's edge, and I'd seen Garrett's easy smile, and a man my age knows that hope and a dry seep don't fill the same bucket. By the middle of the month, the seep had quit altogether, just mud and a green crust and the bones in it, and the herd was down to skeletons that bawled all night in voices that got into your sleep. We lost 11 head in 1 week. Boone wanted to drive them all to the river bed and pray, which was the same as wanting to kill them faster. Thomas wanted nothing. That was the truth of it that month. Thomas Caldwell had folded up inside himself like a letter put back in its envelope, and he let the place run down around him, because grief had taught him that fighting only meant you had further to fall. It was Maren who refused. She'd been 3 weeks at the Bar C, and in 3 weeks she had done what Thomas hadn't done in 2 years. She'd gone through every scrap of paper in that office. She found the original deed in a tin box under a floorboard a leaner had apparently used for keeping things from creditors. She found the loan papers. She laid them side by side on the kitchen table one evening with the bank statements, and she had me and Boone and Thomas all stand there while she walked us through it, her finger moving column to column, lips counting. "Here," she said, "Mr. Royce has charged a land improvement assessment every quarter for 2 years. There were no improvements. He invented a fee and you paid it because you never looked." Her finger moved. "Here, the interest rate on the second loan is 2 points higher than the paper you signed. 2 points. Across that principal over 2 years, that's," she didn't even have to figure it on paper, "near $400 taken that was never owed." Thomas's face didn't move. "It's his bank, his figures." "It's theft, Mr. Caldwell." First time I'd heard her sharp. "Dressed in a banker's collar so you'd be ashamed to call it what it is." "And what would you have me do?" His voice came out gray and flat. "Ride into Holly's and call Amos Royce a thief in front of the whole town? With what? A widow's arithmetic against a banker's ledger." "With the deed," she said. Mr. Caldwell Thomas, she softened, and that was somehow worse, that softening, because it was the voice you'd use on a child. The water, the seep. Royce's man is surveying it because Royce means to take this land for the water, and the railroad survey coming through next spring will make that water worth 10 times what your whole note is. He doesn't want your money paid. He wants you failed before spring, while the land's still cheap and your back's still broke. She put her hand flat on the deed. But the original grant, this one, the territorial grant, not the bank's copy, it ties the seep's water right to the homestead in perpetuity. Royce can take the land if he forecloses. He cannot sever the water and sell it separate. Not legally, which means if you hold the land, you hold the thing he actually wants. The kitchen was dead quiet. I could hear Ceres breathing through the wall, asleep. "And how," Thomas said at last, very quiet, "do I hold the land, Mrs. Holt, when the note's due in 6 weeks and my cattle are dying for the want of the very water you're so pleased about?" She didn't have an answer for that. Not that night. And I watched the hope go out of the room like a lamp pinched out between 2 fingers. The answer, when it came from a man whose real name I never learned, and I have carried that small shame 30 years. The settlers called him Raphael. He was Apache, Chiricahua, I believe, though I'm ashamed to say I never knew enough to be sure of even that, and he ran horses in the broken country east of us, traded them at Holly's and at the fort, and the town used him the way towns use such men. Glad of his horses, free with their cheating, careful never to call him neighbor. I dealt with him a few times over the years. He was a better judge of a horse than any white man I ever met, and a harder bargainer, which the men resented, as if a man hadn't the right to know the worth of his own animals. Boone had cheated him once on a trade, short-counted him on a string of remounts, and laughed about it for a season. Raphael never forgot it. He never traded with the Barcy again after. Maren didn't know any of that. What she knew was that she needed horses fresh enough to move a dying herd, and that the only man near enough to have them was a man the whole valley had taught to despise the Barcy's name. She rode out to his place herself. Took me along because she didn't know the way, but she did the talking, and I'll tell you the truth. I'd have counseled her against it if I'd thought she'd listen, and I'm glad now I didn't, because what she did there I'd not have known to do. She didn't bargain, that was the thing. She came into his camp, 3 of his sons watching from the rocks with rifles they didn't raise, and she got down off biscuit, and the first thing she said, before horses, before need, was, "A man who works for this ranch cheated you years ago, short-counted a trade. I read it in the ledger, it was never made right. I've brought what's owed with interest the way a debt should be paid." And she held out a small leather purse. Raphael looked at the purse a long time. He didn't take it. "Why?" he said. His English was careful, like hers, 2 careful people from opposite ends of the earth. "Because it's owed," she said. "I don't need you to like me, sir. I need the books to be true. They weren't. Now they are." He took the purse then, counted it slow in front of her, testing, I think, whether she'd take offense. She didn't. She waited like she'd waited for the men's laughter to die. And then, only then, she told him about the herd and the water and the note and Royce. She didn't ask for charity. She offered a trade, hard terms, fair both ways. His fresh horses and his knowledge of the high country, where there was a box canyon with a year-round seep of its own and grass nobody grazed, in exchange for a share of the cattle sale, written down, witnessed, real. He listened to all of it. Then he said a thing I've never forgotten. "The men of this place taught me what its word is worth." He looked at me when he said it, and I felt it land. "But you are not those men." "No," Maren said, "I'm not, and I can't undo what they taught you. I can only offer you better and let you decide whether to believe it." He decided to believe it. I have wondered ever since what it cost him to, or what it costs a man to risk trust on people who have given him every reason not to. He had agency in it. He weighed it. He chose, for his own reasons, his own people's needs, the fair price she offered. It was never her saving him. If anything, it was the reverse. But that's a thing the men of the valley never understood, and I only half understood it myself till years later. The high canyon saved the herd. There's no other way to say it. We moved them up over 4 brutal days, Raphael and 2 of his sons, me, Purnell, who'd quietly come over to Maren's side and taken no end of grief from Boone for it. And Maren herself, who rode the whole drive sitting biscuit like a sack of seed and never once complained, though I saw the blood through the back of her dress where the saddle had worn her raw, and she never let on. And when I tried to speak of it, she gave me a look that closed the subject like a slammed door. The canyon was everything Raphael had said: water and grass and shade, walls that held the cattle without fence. Within 2 weeks the survivors had flesh on them again. Within 4 they were near to market weight. But moving cattle and feeding men and outfitting a drive costs money, and the Bar C didn't have any, and the note was due, and here is where I have to tell you about the choice she made, the one that I think of still, on the bad nights. She had money her own. I learned this by accident the night she made up her mind. I came in late for the liniment and heard her in the office, and the door was cracked, and she didn't know I was there. She was sitting with a small tin, a different one, not the deed box, and in it was a roll of bills and some coins, more than I'd have guessed a mill bookkeeper could save, and a folded paper. Thomas was there. He'd come in quiet too. "What's that?" he said. She didn't startle. "It's mine," she said. $81, saved over 9 years, a little at a time, where the mill couldn't dock it and a landlord couldn't find it. She smoothed the bills flat on the desk. "Do you know what it's for, Mr. Caldwell?" He didn't. "It's for leaving," she said, plain. No cruelty in it, just truth laid bare. "Every woman who comes west to a stranger keeps a little if she's wise. Money to get gone if the man she's bound to turns out to be cruel or a drunk or worse. I kept mine sewn in my hem the day I climbed off that wagon and your men laughed at me. It's the price of my own freedom, and I have guarded it more carefully than my own life, because once it was gone I'd have nothing left to run with." The room was so quiet I held my breath outside the door. "And the drive needs $80 for supplies and a wage for the men," she said, "or the cattle die in that canyon fat and worthless because we couldn't get them to the railhead in time." She folded the bills back into the tin. "So I am about to spend my freedom on your ranch, Thomas Caldwell, on a place that laughed at me and a man who buttoned his collar to the throat because he dreaded the sight of me coming. I want you to understand exactly what I'm spending, and exactly that I know what it buys and what it doesn't. It doesn't buy your gratitude. It doesn't buy a single thing from you at all. I am doing it because I have decided this place is worth saving, and because I am tired, so tired, of being a thing other people decide the worth of." She closed the tin. Thomas Caldwell stood there a long moment, and then this proud, grieving, folded-up man did a thing I'd never seen him do, not at his wife's grave, not anywhere. He put his face in his hands and his shoulders went, and he wept, silent, the way men weep when they've forgotten how and it tears something coming out. I stepped back from the door. Some things a man's got no business witnessing. I went to bed without my liniment, and my knee throbbed all night, and I was glad of it, because it gave me something to feel besides what I'd heard. The drive was set for the last week of September. Get the herd down out of the canyon, over the low pass, 40 miles to the railhead at Camber Wells, sell at weight, ride back with bank draft in hand and pay Royce his honest due to the penny, and not 1 cent of the theft Maren had found. She'd written it all out in a fair hand, every false charge, ready to lay before the territorial assessor if Royce balked. We had a plan, we had the horses, we had for the first time in 2 years a chance. And the night before the drive, I woke to Purnell shaking me, his face white in the dark, and behind him through the bunkhouse window the whole eastern sky was the wrong color, a low, ugly, climbing orange. "Eli," he said, and his voice cracked clean in half. "Eli, the canyon's afire. Somebody set the grass at the canyon mouth. The herd's penned in behind it. 40 head of beef, near to market weight. The whole of everything she'd spent her freedom on, trapped in a box canyon with a wall of fire across the only way out. And somewhere out in that dark, Maren was already gone. Her bed was empty. Biscuit was gone from the corral. She'd ridden toward the fire alone. There is a particular sound a grass fire makes when it has wind behind it and 3 months of drought beneath it, and I'd be obliged never to hear it again. It is not a roar. A roar would be honest. It is a vast dry whisper, like the whole world rubbing its hands together, and it travels faster than a horse can run, and it does not care. We rode toward it, me, Purnell, Boone, Tully, and Marsh, Thomas at the front of us flogging his horse like the grief had finally turned outward and found a thing to spend itself on. Raphael and his sons came down off their high camp before we even reached the canyon, having seen the glow, and they reached the herd before any of us. The fire had been set clever and cruel. Garrett's work, we found his sign later, and the empty coal oil tin he'd been too sure of himself to carry off, laid across the canyon mouth where the grass was thickest and the wind would walk it inward. The cattle were bunched at the far end, bawling half-mad, milling against the rock. The only way out was through the fire, or up a steep cut on the north wall that a cow might climb if a cow had any sense, which a cow does not. Maren was at the cut. She'd gotten there ahead of all of us, and she'd done a thing none of us would have thought to do, and most of us wouldn't have dared. She'd seen that the cattle wouldn't take the cut on their own, too steep, too frightened, and she'd seen that the only thing that moves a panicked herd is another body moving with purpose. So she'd gotten down off Biscuit, and she'd led the old mare up the cut by hand, slow, talking the whole time in that low, even voice, a single calm thing in a world gone to fire, and a few head, the boldest, had followed the mare. And then a few more, a trickle becoming a thread. But it was too slow. The fire was eating the canyon faster than the thread could climb, and she knew it. And when we crested the rise and saw her, she was standing at the bottom of the cut in the smoke, turning the herd into it by main force. One small woman against 40 maddened beasts and a wall of flame, and she was losing. What happened next happened fast, and I'll tell it as true as I can. Raphael's eldest son took the high side of the cut and got the lead cattle moving up and over. Raphael and Thomas hit the herd from the fire side, riding the edge of the heat. I will never know how the horses bore it, pushing the milling mass toward the cut. Boone and the brothers and Purnell formed a turning wall. And me, with my bad knee and my fool harmonica still in my breast pocket where I keep it, I got down beside Maren at the bottom of the cut, where the worst of it was, where the cattle came through blind and panicked, and a body could be crushed against the rock without anyone the wiser till the smoke cleared. "Get up the cut," I yelled at her. "Maren, you've done it, let the men finish, get up." Not till they're through. The smoke had her coughing between every word. Her spectacles were gone. There was blood on her face from a hoof or a horn, I never knew which. "I won't leave them penned." A cow came through wild and clipped her and she went down, and my heart stopped, and Thomas saw it from the fire side and screamed her name in a voice I'd never heard out of him, and Raphael was already turning his horse. And she got up. She got up, on her own, spitting dirt, one arm hanging wrong, and she got back into the gap and kept turning cattle, because that was the kind of stubborn she was made of, the kind that has nothing to do with strength and everything to do with refusing. And the last of the herd went up the cut and over with the fire close enough behind to singe their tails, and then there were no more cattle, and Raphael's son hauled her up the slope by her good arm, with the flames coming through the gap where she'd stood not 10 seconds before. We lost 2 head to the fire, 2 out of 40. The rest stood blowing and trembling on the high ground above the canyon while the whole draw burned itself out below us, and the sun came up red through the smoke, and Maren Holt sat on a rock with her arm cradled against her, and her face black with soot and tears cutting clean lines through it, and she was laughing. Quiet, broken, half hysterical. Laughing. Thomas knelt down in front of her. Didn't touch her, he didn't dare, I think, just knelt there. "Why," he said, same word Raphael had used weeks before in his camp. "Why would you go alone? You could have," he couldn't finish it. She looked at him a long moment. "Because I decided this place was worth saving," she said, I told you that. I just hadn't decided yet whether you were. She wiped her face with her good hand and only made it worse. I think I have now. I'm afraid I have. We made the drive 3 days late, which should have ruined us, except that being late turned out to be the thing that saved us. Because Royce, certain we'd never get the cattle out of the burning canyon, had already filed early foreclosure papers in Holly's on the strength of a default that hadn't happened yet, signing his own name to a crime in his hurry. Maren laid it all out before the territorial assessor at Camberwells, where we'd driven to sell. The false charges, the 2 stolen points of interest, the surveyor on land he had no right to, the foreclosure filed before the note was even due. She had it all in that fair hand of hers, witnessed, dated, the deed with its perpetual water right laid on top like a stone on a grave. She didn't raise her voice once. She didn't have to. A column of numbers done true is a quiet and terrible thing in front of an honest official. Royce lost his charter inside the year. Garrett ran south and we never heard of him again. The note got paid to the penny of what was honestly owed, and not 1 cent more, and the Barcy kept its land and its water, and the railroad came through the next spring, and the seep was worth, just as she'd said, 10 times the whole of the old debt. So she saved it, the whole ranch, everything. A small woman in a gray traveling dress that 4 men had laughed at, who couldn't sit a horse, and wiped her spectacles on her sleeve. I'd like to tell you it was simple after that. That the men who'd laughed lined up to beg her pardon, that Thomas Caldwell unbuttoned his collar and loved her plain and easy, that the West rewards its hard cases with soft endings. It doesn't mostly. Boone left that winter, too proud to work for a place a woman had saved, and good riddance. Thomas and Maren came to something. I won't call it love, because I never heard either of them call it that, but it was a thing built slow out of respect and shared work, and a man learning late to be grateful, and I think it was sturdier than love for being built that way. Sari called her mama by the 2nd spring. That one was easy. That one was always going to be easy. Raphael took his fair share of the sale, written and witnessed, and he traded with the Barcy after that. And he and Maren had a way of speaking to each other, 2 careful people, 2 outsiders the valley had decided the worth of, that I won't pretend to have fully understood. The spring the railroad came, his people were pushed east off the broken country by men with papers and soldiers, the way it always went, and he came by the ranch the night before he left. He and Maren stood at the corral a long while in the dark. I don't know what was said. He raised a hand to me as he rode out at dawn. I raised mine back. I never learned his name, his true one. I called him Raphael to the end, the name the men who cheated him had hung on him, and he let me, and that was a kindness of his I didn't deserve and have never gotten over. There's a particular shame in that, in knowing a man helped save everything you had, rode the edge of a fire for cattle that weren't his, asked nothing but a fair deal honestly kept, and you never even troubled to learn what his own mother called him. I think about that more than I think about the fire. I'm an old man now. The Barcy ran another 40 years, and Sari's grandchildren run it still, and there's a photograph in the front room of a small, severe woman in spectacles who they're told saved the place, and they believe it the way you believe a thing you can't quite picture. But I was there. I counted the laughs the day she came, 4 of them. And I was there at the canyon, close enough to touch her, when she got up off the ground with her arm hanging wrong and went back into the gap. People ask me sometimes, the young ones, what made her do it, spend her own escape, ride alone into a fire, stand her ground for a place that mocked her. They want a clean answer. They want her to have been brave or good or in love, some single word they can fold up and put away. I tell them what I know, which isn't a word. I tell them she was tired of other people deciding what she was worth, and so one autumn she decided it herself, in fire and arithmetic, and made the whole valley read the sum. What she never said, what I only worked out years on, turning it over the way I turn a strip of latigo through my fingers, counting, was that she